The title is Servanthood is Superior. Now, the last time we talked, where we left the disciples was in the far north area of Israel, Caesarea Philippi. This is the very start of where the Jordan River begins. We talked about the big wall and the cave where the water at one time used to come out. It doesn't now because of an earthquake, but at the time the Jordan River started here, and that was where they had all the terrible worship of all the gods, and it was called the gates of hell. And this is where all these gods were worshipped. While they were there or on their way, Mark tells us, Jesus asked the question, well, who does everybody say that I am? Am I like one of all these others, or am I different? And they gave an answer. Well, then he made it more personal, and he said, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter gave a great response. You're the Messiah, the Son of God. So from that point on, Jesus is moving towards Jerusalem. We're about 6 months prior to his crucifixion. This also puts them at around the same time of the Feast of Tabernacles, where they would build shelters outside of their homes, and they would essentially camp out, reminding them of being out in the wilderness and how God took care of them. This is Jesus moving from the north, way up here in Caesarea Philippi, and then Jerusalem is way down here towards the bottom. Capernaum, there that you see, that's their home base, and they will come back to that even this evening. This is the place where, on the way out, Jesus is talking that we are going towards Jerusalem. Peter says, no, you're not going to die. And then Jesus turns around and says, get behind me, Satan, after Peter gives such a great answer, and then he fails so miserably. From here on out, he's going to press this issue and press this issue. And the whole time, they don't get it. It just can't. Their preconceived notions, what they've always thought, what they've always learned, they couldn't get past. Because of their preconceived notions, they couldn't gain any new truth. And so that's where we're going to find them. Verse 1 of chapter 9. Then he told them, I tell all of you with certainty, some people standing here will not experience death until they see the kingdom of God arrive in power. In the next few verses, this is going to come into play. Just a few, Peter, James, and John, are going to see God's kingdom in its power. They're going to see it. But there's so much impacted in this little few, I don't know, it's like 8 verses, maybe 10, that it's going to take us most of the evening to cover it. I realized as I went back through like the story of Matthew, or when we went through Matthew verse by verse, I didn't really cover much of it. And so I'd like to take this because there is so much that's implied and important for our spiritual lives that we find here in this transfiguration. So verse 2, 6 days later, after he says this, so even less than a week, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, and he led them up a high mountain. Now, from the picture that you saw before, here's Caesarea Philippi on the north. Just north of that is Mount Hermon. And a lot of Bible scholars now believe that Mount Hermon is where the transfiguration took place. For proximity purposes, for sure. The other possibles are down here in between Lake Hula and Galilee, and then way down here Mount Tabor. But that's on the far side of Galilee. Mount Hermon is the tallest mountain in the Middle East, and it sets 9,000 feet above sea level. But then in between, down here, you have the Jordan Valley, and it's below sea level. So it's just a huge climb, just massive climb. And this is probably where Jesus took them. He took them to be alone with him. His appearance was changed. And when we have the word changed, it's really weak in our English. And I hate to do this, but just piece of verses, but there's so much in this that I don't want us to miss it. It says that his appearance changed, but for our English vernacular, changed is not the right word. The Greek word is metamorpho, and it's the same. It's where we get our word metamorphosis. So Jesus didn't just change and put on some nice bright clothing. No, he was metamorphosized like you'd think of a caterpillar moving into a butterfly. He was completely form changed into something that was glorious. And it was happening right before their eyes. Right in front of them, Mark even says. Verse 3, and his clothing became dazzling white, whiter than anyone on earth could bleach them. Then Elijah appeared to them, accompanied by Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. Now Moses represents the law. He was their human lawgiver. When you see it several times throughout the scriptures, Jesus even mentions it. What does the law and the prophets say? Well, the law was Moses. Elijah was the great prophet in the Old Testament. And so when they're coming to meet with Jesus, they are spanning all of the Torah. In fact, Jesus said the law and the prophets covered until John the Baptist. And so you have the law and the prophets, the Old Testament, and then Jesus is the fulfillment of those, and he takes care, it's his mission from here on out, is the idea. Verse 5, then Peter told Jesus, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us set up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Peter didn't know how to respond because they were terrified. I don't know about you, but I do. I match Peter so well. Just absolutely scared to death. And there's dead silence because what do you say in a circumstance like this? Well, hey, Jesus, I know what to do. It's around the time of tabernacles. Let's just set up one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. Let's stick this out. Let's hold out here for a while. They were viewing all of Jesus that they could handle, and it blew their minds. 1 John, the gospel writer John, the one that went up on the mountain here, he says something interesting in 1 John chapter 3, verse 2. He says, one of these days we will be like him because we will see him as he is. But at this moment, they weren't like him because they were still in their human forms. They saw something that literally changed their life, gave them lasting impacts on their life and their writing, and they were only taking in part of what he really was. You can also go to John's book in the Revelation in chapter 1, and it talks about when he turned around, he saw someone speak his voice, he turns around and he sees this picture of Jesus, and he writes it down, and it's powerful, it's strong. But again, even then, he's still in his human form. What we're seeing here in all of Jesus' power does not compare to who he really is. And one of these days, and I don't even know how to explain this one, we're going to see him as he actually is because we're going to be like him. So one of these days, what we see Jesus as right here doesn't even compare to what we will be. This fact blew Peter, James, and John's mind. Peter in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 16 through 19. This is what he says. When we told you about the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus the Messiah, we did not follow any clever myths. Rather, we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. We saw it firsthand. For he received honor and glory from God the Father when these words from the majestic glory were spoken about him. This is my Son whom I love. I am well pleased with him. We ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain. Therefore, we regard the message of the prophets as confirmed beyond doubt. And you will do well to pay attention to it, as to a lamp that is shining in a gloomy place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. So for Peter, he's saying, listen, I saw this firsthand. And because of this, You need to take the words of the prophets without any doubt. And just imagine the words that you heard from the law and the prophets as a light in a dark place. Because one of these days the light's going to come on, it's no longer going to be gloomy, and you can't even imagine what it's going to be like. If this is what blew my mind. Who did the disciples recognize? In this story, who did they recognize? They recognized Moses and Elijah. Peter says it, right? Lord, let's set up 3 tabernacles. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elias or Elijah. But this is what's funny. How did they recognize that that was Moses and Elijah? I mean, for us, we might be able to pull a picture up off of Facebook or something like that, right? They had no pictures. These guys have been dead for hundreds, if not 1,000 years. Not 1,000, but hundreds of years. How in the world did the disciples recognize Moses and Elijah? In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12, it says, we will be known as we are known in eternity. So somehow in heaven, and again, this doesn't really answer the question perfectly, and I don't know how it actually works. But when we become glorified in our bodies, people will know us just like we're being known right now. And I don't know how that's going to make sense. I don't know if we're going to have tattooed our name across there. I really don't know. We're a family? Okay. That could be it. But regardless, somehow the disciples recognized Moses and Elijah from years past. But here's what's funny and troubling. Who did the disciples not recognize? They didn't recognize Jesus for who he was. Because Peter says, all right, we're going to set one up for you. We're going to set one up for Elijah, one for Moses. And he's putting Jesus on the same level as Moses and Elijah. Now, they were great guys. They were. They did wonderful things for God. They were faithful. But they weren't on the same level. And because of Peter saying, and it's hilarious the way the story goes, Peter saying, let's set it up here, here, and here. And as he's saying it, God speaks from heaven, this is my son who you should continue to listen to. You see, they were listening to Elijah and Moses. They were listening to the prophets, the law. But God says, no, he's the one you listen to. And when they look up, the only one that's standing left in front of them is Jesus. I don't know how you could emphasize the point more importantly than that. God says, they were good. But there's only one you need to be listening to. And that's my son whom I'm well pleased. And to be honest, we got to be careful of that as well. There are a lot of good preachers and teachers out there. There's a ton of them. And in today's world, you can find them online easily. But at their best, they are still not to the level of the Word become flesh and dwelt among us. At some point, even without them trying, they're fallible humans, they will and I will fail you. Because we don't know it all. There's only one place we can have as a source of information that is perfect, and that's Jesus himself. And God says here, this is my son. You better listen to him and nobody else. So verse 9, on their way down the mountain, Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept the matter to themselves, but argued about what rising from the dead meant. Here it is again. Their preconceived notions that Jesus is going to come back as a conquering hero. They can't get the idea that he's going to die. Verse 11, so they can't make sense of the rising from the dead. So they asked him, don't the scribes say that Elijah must come first? I just saw Elijah. That would count, right? He told them, Elijah is indeed coming first and will restore all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer a great deal and be treated shamefully? Jesus gives them both sides of it. You know the part of the conquering hero. You got that one down pat. But you're missing what I've come to do for this turn. But I tell you that Elijah has come. Yet people treated him just as they pleased, as is written about him. There's two Elijah comings that Jesus mentions here. The first one is before the great and terrible day of the Lord, and that's in Malachi chapter 4 and 5, the last book of the Old Testament, where that's what's mentioned. Elijah will show up before the great and terrible day of the Lord. That's for the last days. But then, and that's still yet in future, because it says here that he's going to come and that all things are going to be put in order. And that hasn't happened yet, so that's still yet to come. But the second one he mentions, he says that Elijah has come and the people treated him just as they pleased, and he's actually referring to John the Baptist's ministry here. And by this time, of course, John the Baptist has already lost his head. So he's referring to John the Baptist, pointing to him, as we read about in John chapter 1 in John's Gospel. Now, before I go on, there is something that I want to bring out as well. These two could possibly be the two witnesses in the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 11, verse 5, it says, these two witnesses come, and that if anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds from their mouth and devours their enemies. And if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner. These have the power to shut heaven so that no rain falls in the days of their prophecy, and they have no power over and they have power over the waters to turn them to blood, and to strike the earth with all plagues as often as they desire. There's going to be two witnesses that are going to come before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Almost nearly everybody, I don't know of anybody that doesn't, of commentators that believe Elijah is going to be one of them, because Elijah was ushered into heaven, he was raptured up, and didn't die. And several prophecies talk about Elijah coming back in that day. But the other one is somewhat in question. And to be totally honest, I have always been in the camp that it was Enoch, because Enoch was also, he walked with the Lord and was no more. So he didn't die. And there's that passage in Hebrews that says, it's appointed unto man once to die and then the judgment. That's what I've always taken with that. But as you look at it, there's actually a lot of contrasts that don't really apply with Enoch. And I'm not saying it's not. I don't really care who it is, because I hope by then I won't be around. But if I am, I'll find out then. I'm not going to be against them. I'm not going to get... The fire's not going to call out against me, so I don't really care which one it is. Malachi, like we read, 4 and 5 say that Elijah will return before the great day of the Lord. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18, the Lord tells Moses himself that there would be one that would be raised up, a prophet like him. Also, in Revelation, the witnesses that come are both Jewish. Well, Elijah and Moses are both Jewish. Enoch wasn't Jewish. Enoch was before Abraham. He was a Gentile. Also, Moses and Elijah are the only two that are recorded to carry on a conversation with God face to face on Mount Sinai. Of course, we know from, Moses did quite a bit when he got the law. But then after Mount Carmel, Elijah, what did he do? He ran for his life from Jezebel. And where did he end up? He ended up in the cave at Mount Sinai. And that's when the Lord passed by him in the thunder and the lightning and all that. And he came off quiet as well. And that's when he heard the Lord. So Elijah and Moses are the only two that actually spoke to the Lord on Mount Sinai. So I find that interesting as well. I actually think that Enoch is representative of the Gentile church, the bride, being raptured away before the great and terrible day of the Lord. One other spot to this, I had them underlined here. It tells in Revelation the power that these two witnesses have. And notice what they are. Fire proceeds from their mouth. Who called down fire from heaven on his enemies? Elijah. Also has the power to shut up heaven. We know from the book of James that Elijah had the power to call down the rain, but he also was the one for the 3.5 years that he made it so it wouldn't rain during the reign of Ahab. But then the other two powers that are mentioned, waters turned to blood. Well, who did that? Moses did in Egypt. And then also, what else was Moses known for in Egypt? All the plagues. And that's what it says. And to strike the earth with all plagues. So, anyways, like I said, it doesn't change our relationship with the Lord, because hopefully we won't be there. But if we are, I think all of us aren't going to be opposed to neither one of these fellas. So, that's just for there. Anyways, all right, verse 14. As they approached the other disciples, they're coming down from the mountain. As they approached the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. The whole crowd was very surprised to see Jesus, and they ran to welcome him. He asked the scribes, "What are you doing arguing with them, or my disciples?" A man in the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you. He has a spirit that won't let him talk. Whenever it brings on a seizure, it throws him to the ground. Then he foams at the mouth, he grinds his teeth, and he becomes stiff. He's an epileptic. So I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they didn't have the power." After this massive, wonderful spiritual high of being up on the mountain, seeing this transfiguration, they come down and they come into a spiritual mess. Now, the spiritual mess has 3 different parts that just gradually get worse. The first one is the religious leaders, the scribes, are arguing with the disciples. Any good shepherd's going to come down when he sees the wolves tearing up the sheep, and he's going to be pretty perturbed, and Jesus was. He calls the scribes out first chance he gets. Then, the second part to the problem was, there's this little boy that's been demon-possessed. It often sends him into seizures. It made it so he can't speak, and it's often tried to kill the poor boy. And obviously we know that Jesus has compassion on the crowd, and how much more would he have on this poor boy? So that's the second part. And the third part is his disciples' faith was weak. It made him angry, and we'll see that in just a second in his next phrase. His disciples' faith were weak because they had not properly prepared, and now they're feeling ashamed and defeated. It doesn't look good for Jesus' followers at this point. Every time something great spiritually happens, you can rest assured that Satan's going to be sending out his birds like the parable. He's going to send out his birds to snatch up the good seed before it has a chance to grow. And that's what he's doing here. Verse 20, so they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into convulsions. He fell on the ground. I lost my place. He fell on the ground and kept rolling around and foaming at the mouth. Then Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" He said, "Since he was a child. The spirit has often thrown him into a fire and into water to destroy him. But if you are able to do anything, have pity on us and help us." Jesus told him, "If you are able, everything is possible for the one who believes." I had never seen this before. The man asked, if you're able. It's an honest question. He's desperate for his son. But Jesus, and I put it here in the King James, or in the New King James, because it literally has the same wording. He said, "Jesus, if you are able." And Jesus turns around the question and says, "If you're able to believe." I'm able to do. The problem isn't the supply. The problem is the delivery. If you're able to believe is the bigger question. This is another instance of someone being healed based on somebody else's faith. We often get the idea that it's all about how much we believe. And Jesus even makes mention of it here. But this boy had no capabilities of belief at all. He's possessed by a demon. But when the father brings the boy to Jesus, it's because of the father's faith that Jesus may be able to do something that this boy is released. That should mess with our theology. Because you know what? It's not all about me on me. It's about my faith and how it relates to my kids and my wife, my family, my friends. Those that are in need, those that are broken, those that are struggling. It's my faith. It's mine that has to bring them to Jesus because they don't have any. Right? And we've seen this over and over and over again in the book of Mark. And then he's about to give my favorite prayer probably in all of the Bible. And it's one that I quote all the time. Verse 24. With tears flowing, the child's father at once cried out, I do believe, but help my unbelief. He was flat honest with Jesus. I've got some, Jesus, but it's not 100%. This has been a bad situation. You know, can you imagine being this father? I mean, as the dad, we try to solve the problems. We try to fix the toys. We try to protect our kids. We try to provide for our kids. And as a little boy, every time he has his head turned, this demon is trying to kill him. Every time they're walking down the street, he's worried about this kid running out in front of traffic. Every time they're walking next to the beach, he's worried about the boy and if the boy's going to go under. Time and time and time again. And he's helpless. We could understand his lack of faith. Jesus, if you can do anything. I believe you can do something. You're a great prophet. But I'm not 100%. The issue is not of simply not having enough faith that anything can happen. That's not the issue. It's greater than that. It's that even when your faith isn't good enough, Jesus still does miracles. Now think about that one. We get the idea, well, if you had enough faith, you'd have this, 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 and this. Or Jesus or God would heal this, 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 and this. You just need enough faith. No, it's much more than that. It's even if you don't have enough faith, Jesus can still heal this, 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 and this. And he can take care of this problem, and this problem. It's not about if we have perfect faith. It's if we're humble and honest with what faith we have. Romans chapter 1 verse 17 says, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from what? From faith to faith. And then it says, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. None of our faith is 100%. But that's okay. If our faith is 25%, God will do something great when we're honest with him, and he'll move our faith up to a 32. And if our 32 isn't good enough, he'll do something else that's great and bump it up to a 45. Because our faith grows from faith to faith. This is powerful. And honestly, it flows in direct opposition to a whole lot of denominations. I'm glad God doesn't work off my 100% faith because, like I said, I pray this one an awful lot. My mind tells me that God can do exceedingly abundantly above all I could ask or even think. So if I could comprehend it, God can do more. I believe that in my mind. The problem is my heart applying what my mind tells me. And so I pray all the time. God is my witness. Lord, I know you can do exceedingly abundantly above all. But my heart's having problems. So whatever you're willing to do, please do. It's not an issue of simply how good our faith is and our lack of faith. You say, well, Pastor, we just went through the passage that said he could do nothing in the towns because of their lack of faith. Their issue wasn't that they lacked faith as much as it was they didn't want to believe. They rejected him because they knew who the kid was when he was growing up. They refused to believe, and Jesus will not work where he has refused to believe. But where we are humble and honest before him, if we believe, anything can happen. But here's what's really great about this. We're talking about a demon-possessed boy. And this is a bad one. This one is worse than the man with a legion in him. The disciples couldn't even cast this one out. And it was based on a man's faith that wasn't 100%, that said, if you can do something, that this boy was released. Not on his faith, but his father's faith that wasn't perfect. We've got a whole host of family and friends that desperately are controlled. They may not be possessed by a demon, but they're certainly oppressed by some. Some that they've applied to their own life, maybe. Well, it's up to us to say, Jesus, my faith isn't 100%, and I'm honest about it. But I know you can do great things. Would you do a miracle? Because it's there that he does them. Verse 25. When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you spirit that won't let him talk or hear. Think about that. How poor was this poor child? He couldn't hear, and he couldn't even speak. The only thing he could do was look out, and that's it. He says, Jesus said, I command you to come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit screamed, shook the child violently, and came out. The boy was like a corpse, and many said that he was dead. But Jesus took his hand and he helped him up, and he stood up. Mark is reminding us of Jairus' daughter, the 12-year-old, remember? Jairus comes, asks Jesus to come and heal. Jesus on the way gets stopped by the woman with the issue of the blood. Just as that's happening, somebody comes up and says, oh, don't worry, don't bother the master, she's dead. Jesus said, no, she's not dead. She's what? She's sleeping. Now the reason was because every time someone that's saved, someone that's walking with the Lord dies in the scripture, it's not mentioned that they're dead, it mentions that they're sleeping. Because this little girl was sleeping in the Lord. And he says, no, she's okay. You just have faith, you believe. So they go up there, and what does he do? He takes her by the hand and he lifts her up. Now this will probably stretch I know it stretches my theology, but it'll probably stretch yours too. He does the same thing for this man. Everybody else said he's dead. Jesus said, nope, he's sleeping. And he takes the man by the hand, just as he did Jairus' daughter. Why? Because this man is now saved. Jesus didn't just release him from a demon. He entered his life and saved him spiritually. But here's what's even crazier. Notice what Jesus said to the spirit. He said, I command you to come out of him and what? Never enter him again. Jesus puts a powerful protection over this boy. One that this demon that's exceptionally powerful can't touch. This is incredible. Here's why. Matthew chapter 12, verse 43, Jesus is saying, when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places seeking rest and finds none. Then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then he goes and he takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of the man is worse than the first. So it shall also be with this wicked generation. The point Jesus is making here is, hey, if this gets cleaned up, don't let it show back up. I don't know of any other case that Jesus said, and never enter him again or her, depending on who it was. I don't see it anywhere else in Scripture. And I may be wrong, you can check it for me. But the point was, Jesus put a level of protection over this boy that few, if any, else had. And this demon was not allowed to enter this boy again. Wow. That's beautiful. And it was all based off of a faith of a father that was just humble and honest and said, hey, I believe, but help my unbelief. If he can do that for this man, he can do it for us too. Verse 25. When Jesus saw that the crowd was running to the scene, I read all that. Verse 28. When Jesus came home, his disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive out the spirit? He told them, this kind can come out only by prayer and fasting. Paul makes mentions of it in his writing of principalities and powers, and they're actually ranks of angels. And this one was an exceptionally strong demon that they couldn't cast out. It only would come out by prayer and fasting. That means you need to prepare ahead of time, because you can't fast at the moment and it work, right? When we pray, we are drawing our spiritual hearts to God. When we fast as we pray, we are taking our physical body and leaving it behind, saying, I'm going to leave this to the side because I don't just want my prayers in my heart. I want all of me with God. Our lack of prayer and fasting shows up in our spiritual weakness. We make all kinds of excuses of why we can't fast and pray, but none of them are important. All of them are just excuses, because every single one of us can fast and pray. You say, oh, well, I got a physical condition. I have to have it, my blood sugar, my blood issue. You can fast something. And the only reason you don't fast and pray is because you choose not to. And in that, you also choose to be spiritually weak. How's your toes feel? As I was studying that, that's exactly what I have written in my notes. I have ouch. Yep. All right, we'll keep on before I get lost out of here. I lost my page. Okay. Verse 30. There we go. Yeah. Then they left that place and they passed through Galilee. Jesus didn't want anyone to find out about it. He's going secretly because he was teaching his disciples, the Son of Man will be betrayed into human hands. They will kill him, but after being dead for 3 days, he will be raised. They didn't understand what this statement meant, and they were afraid to ask him. Their preconceived notions would not let them believe a thing. We are supposed to have an answer for the hope that lies within us, right? We're supposed to know what we believe and why we believe it. And it can't be on the final day, at the final exam, say, well, it's because my Sunday school teacher taught it to me, or because my pastor believed it. No, we have to know why we believe what we believe, and the only answer we can give for it is because it's what was in God's living word. Our opinions won't save us. The words I think are a poison worse than arsenic, because it won't just kill your body, it'll send your soul to hell too. We need to know why we believe what we believe. They were just taking the words of the teachers, the priests and the Pharisees, the scribes, that said there's only going to be one Messiah and he's going to show up as the ruling king. They could not wrap their head around what was going to happen at the crucifixion and resurrection. Verse 33, and we will almost be done. Then they came to Capernaum, so now they're back home. While Jesus was at home, Peter's home, he asked the disciples, what were you arguing about on the road? Because it's about a 40-mile journey from where they were at. But they kept silent because they argued on the road with one another about who was the greatest. As possibly because the 3 went up to the Mount of Transfiguration and the other 9 were down, and then word might have got around and they might have been upset that we didn't get to go to. Well, they were arguing about who's the greatest. So he sat down, called the 12, and he told them, "If anyone wants to be first, he must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child, and maybe it was one of Peter's. We don't really know. It was Peter's home. And he had him stand among them. He took him in his arms, and he told them, "Whoever welcomes a child like this in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Verse 35 is the reason that Mark wrote his book, his gospel. This is the whole point. And we're right around the middle of his book. This is like going up here is where we're at, verse 35, chapter 9, and then it's going to go down to the crucifixion. He was showing that Jesus was the greatest by being the least, by the suffering servant, the one that served all, even Judas. It is so hard for us to lower ourselves. And that's why so often God lowers us by his hand. And boy, isn't that miserable. When God puts us in the right place we should be, it sure does humble us. But as people, we want to be noticed. We want to look better than somebody else. We want to be served. We want to be appreciated. We want to be paid what we deserve. The problem is, a servant is never noticed. A servant is better than no one. The servant of all is never served by anyone else. A servant is never appreciated. And a servant doesn't get paid either. You say, that sounds awful. Yeah, it is. But what did Jesus do? This whole book we've been talking about Jesus serving. What did the Old Testament say? Isaiah chapter 53 verse 2 says, "For he grew up before him like a tender plant." This whole passage is about a prophecy about Jesus. "And like a root out of the dry ground, he had no form, he had no majesty that we should look at him. And there is no attractiveness that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by others, a man of sorrows, intimately familiar with suffering, and like one from whom the people hid their faces. And we despised him and did not value him. Surely he has borne our sufferings and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken, struck down by God and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. And the punishment that made us whole was upon him, and by his bruises we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned each of us to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." Verse 7, he was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he didn't open up his mouth. Like a lamb he was led to the slaughter. As a sheep that is before its shears is silent, so he did not open his mouth. From detention and judgment he was taken away, and who can even think about his descendants? For he was cut off from the land of the living. He was stricken for the transgressions of my people. Then they made his grave with the wicked and the rich people in his death, although he had committed no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. Yet the Lord was willing to crush him, and he made him suffer. Although you make his soul an offering for sin, he will see his offspring, and he will prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will triumph in his hand. Out of the suffering of his soul he will see light and find satisfaction, and through his knowledge his servant, the righteous one, will make many righteous, and he will bear their iniquities. That's what Jesus did. If this is what Jesus did, it is a reasonable request for us to do the same thing for others. If that's what he did for us, there's no price that's too high or too costly. And there's no position too low that we should not take it. If we go back to Mark 8, the few verses right before this passage we studied tonight, Jesus, as they're walking along the road, he called the crowd to himself along with his disciples, verse 34, chapter 8, and he told them, if anyone wants to follow me, he must deny himself, pick up his cross, and follow me continuously. Because whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and for the gospel will save it. What profit will a person have if he gains the whole world and forfeits his life? Indeed, what can a person give in exchange for his life? There is nothing in this life that is worth losing step with Jesus. If Jesus went through Isaiah 53 for you and me, and Psalm 22, and John's gospel, and Matthew's gospel, and Mark's gospel, and Luke's gospel, if he went through all of that for you and me, there's no price too high that we shouldn't pay, and there's no position too low that we wouldn't be willing to take out of just respect and love for what he's done for us. It is our calling, if we want to follow him, to bear his cross. Not our cross, to bear his cross. The Lord just brought something to my mind just before we go. That demon couldn't be brought out except by prayer and fasting. How many times have we been trying to pray and our faith is not strong enough because we haven't prayed and fasted over other people's lives? And maybe, just maybe, God is calling us to pray and fast over some of these that are on our hearts tonight. Because I don't know about you, but the Lord brought at least 3 or 4 people to my mind as I was praying that are desperately attacked by Satan, and they need a release. And if it takes me fasting for however long, it would be worth it if they were in the kingdom. Amen? Maybe that's what the Lord's calling us to. Lord, help us to be obedient. All right. God bless you. You're dismissed. Thanks for being here. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I pray this video was a blessing to you. If it was, please hit the like button. This helps other people find our content as well. You can also subscribe to the channel by clicking on my beautiful face. This will give you announcements when we put out new videos. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists of our verse-by-verse Bible studies, and then you'll also see the newest video that we've put out. We try to put out 2 or 3 a week. I pray that God richly blesses you. Thank you for watching.